So, this is the map of my game. And like most 2D pixel worlds, my little space guy is confined to the bounds of this map. So this got me thinking, how could I create the feeling that the player is walking around a seamless, infinite world? Just like in Super Mario Galaxy. Or real life. Well, that's exactly what I've been working on. Hi, my name's Gab, and today I'll be showing you how the idea of turning my board game into a video game has been evolving. We already have the player harvesting and foraging for different types of foods in a randomized generated world. But the edges of that map are a little janky. But rather than just adding a border or water to the edges of the map like most other 2D games do, to stop the player from walking into the Unity void, I tried to think of a system that would complement my design for players exploring unknown small planets. To try and achieve the feeling of a game like Super Mario Galaxy, but within a 2D space. And my idea, well, it's quite simple really. Currently, I have the world loading in using Unity's tile map system, generating a map that is 40 by 20 tiles with the food and flowers spawning on top of these tiles for the player to interact with. But what I want to add is, as the player moves through the space with set trigger points around the edges of this map, to have the world reload itself and spawn identical tiles in the direction that the player is moving towards, as a form of repeatable world loading. Similar to walking on a small planet, or in a circle even, returning to an area you are familiar with and have already explored, to reap and harvest all the planet has to offer. So first things first, I got started on creating these trigger points, making them an obvious colour for testing, getting them to spawn at each of the 4 edges of the map, with them making sure they were dynamically sizing to whatever size I was setting the map to, so that if I wanted to create different sized planets in the future, they would still encapsulate each edge. And after playing around in code and adding an offset so that the player wouldn't be able to see the repeated map pop into existence, I successfully had the tiles loading in when the player entered these triggers. I now needed some form of tile data, however, so that each individual tile could store and remember exactly what was spawned on them with the initial load of the world. This luckily also wasn't that hard to do, and I even was able to implement the logic for the new repeated tiles to spawn in the food as harvested or unharvested, depending what the player had done on the original map. Next though, is where things got a little tricky. Though I was successfully spawning in repeated tiles around the original map, I now needed to figure out how to add and spawn these triggers to the new chunks being loaded in, which proved to be a little difficult, as it required a lot of maths. I decided to go back to the drawing board and think of a new way to achieve this idea of a seamless planet. But naturally, as any developer does, I took a little break from these hard calculations and decided to have a bit of fun working on some of the other features of the game. First off, I decided to add a new type of biome, Rock World, that would complement my already created Grass World, so that I could have 2 variations to use for testing, for when the player is loading into planets, to make them feel different, and that will eventually spawn different types of foods and flowers and a whole lot of other things. I also needed a way though to actually load into these worlds in order to truly test this different types of biome data. So, of course, I created a new scene, using the colour palette of the forage cards from our board game. This scene will serve as the town where the player returns to between exploring. Having a bit too much fun, I then created some UI, with planets of different sizes and different patterns, in which you would be able to select a world to explore. With, of course, probably spending a bit too much time creating these twinkly little stars. That totally doesn't start to send my computer off to the moon. Without getting too much into the detail of the story of this game yet, I created a portal in the town scene, giving it an opening and close animation as the player approaches it to let them know that it can be interacted with. And the townspeople? Well, let's just say that my original idea for the player, based off of our player cards in our board game, will now be serving a new role in this game. So I spent a bit of time practicing my pixel art to iterate on the design of the original alien that I had made, choosing to use now a base colourless prefab so that we could use the same object as the parent for each alien. And of course giving these aliens similar colours to how they look in our board game. So with some of the more fun stuff I created, I eventually got to hooking all of these elements up together so that the player could then loading into the world. There is a lot to do to make this transition not only feel but look a lot better. But it was really awesome to see the start of being able to load into different planets with different biomes and harvestables. But with the fun stuff out of the way, it was back to the original task at hand. How would I go about implementing a 2D pixel planet that the player could seamlessly walk around on? Now, this next method that I went with might not be the most optimized option I could have chosen, but it's definitely one that I could see more immediate long-term success with. Rather than using triggers to determine when and where to spawn in the next world, that I would then need to worry about for every single chunk, I instead thought about having the game check for the player's location in the world, and determine from there instead when the tiles should be repeated. Essentially creating a chunk loading system using this method of tracking the player location and assigning coordinates to each repeated world. And after some trial and error, we finally got it working. Now, there's still a lot to do to not only improve the system, but also to optimize it, such as only checking the player's location during set intervals rather than constantly on update. And perhaps for us to consider loading in the world in batches rather than individually, so that the transition here is as seamless as we intend. But I am extremely proud with the progress that we've made with this type of world loading. This solid, generic base giving us a lot of room to build upon in the future. And the confidence that our idea of walking around a planet within a 2D space will make for some unique gameplay and interactions. So, in the meantime, I'm going to carry on improving this system. And for the next video, maybe look into designing and implementing more of the town scene, with perhaps shedding a bit more light on the intended core gameplay loop of the game, how the narrative of this game will differ from our board game, and what exactly the relationship is between our little space guy and his cute little alien pals. So if you like this video, make sure to like, comment and subscribe so that you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.